Apple announced at their worldwide developer conference recently that starting with this year's fall refreshes of their various operating systems, Apple will be rolling out a new user interface dubbed Liquid Glass. It looks so good, you could lick it. For the record, that joke is for me, because I doubt anyone in my audience will get it. That's right, I'm not making fun of politicians for this video. You might want me to, but unless you decide to scroll away right now, you're gonna get to hear about nerdy computer stuff, damn it. Anyway, Liquid Glass is Apple's new branding for the interface that will be consistent across their product line that includes cool interface elements that kind of look like they're made out of real glass, including how if you move your phone or iPad or different other things, it's going to feel like the glass in the phone is moving with you, and like you're going to see that in the light, and it looks really cool, even if it is a bit subtle. Because, it's a phone, it's not just a toy. Though I guess for some people, their phones are toys, also safety blankets. And it's notable that this user interface is going to roll out across Apple's whole product line because Apple has been a little notorious for putting out a new interface on just one product and then progressively spreading that design language across all of their devices until eventually things actually look consistent again until a year or two later when they make a new product and now again, nothing looks like it all goes together anymore. So why did I jokingly call liquid glass aqua? Because way back when Apple released the very first version of macOS 10, and the X is pronounced 10 because Steve Jobs knew that having thousands of nerds correcting everyone when they called it OS X would not result in a lot of people getting unnecessarily irritated with each other. But one of the reasons why people were so excited for the first release of macOS 10 was because of Aqua, the interface that when it was designed, he said one of the goals was to make the user want to lick the computer, which may have resulted in some 90s kids having very confusing feelings. You might notice some similarities in terms of how they look between Aqua and Liquid Glass. The difference being that with Aqua, there might have been movement, but it was all very much kind of like pre-planned and like it was designed either in a 3D rendering program or Photoshop, and then like static things were put into the operating system so that like this animation would play, but it didn't feel like a real 3D object. But, for the early 2000s, it was still super cool. But eventually, on the internet, everyone started to like big bubbles and they couldn't deny it. And so eventually, Aqua kind of became the thing that was just all over the internet, not really exclusive to Apple's products. And so then people kind of got just too used to seeing that same effect everywhere. So over the years after that, Apple started really tamping down on how bubbly Aqua looked because they didn't want their operating system to just look like the bad designs everybody else was making on the internet. Eventually, Steve Jobs, who was a big fan of both the photorealism and the liquidy glassy look of Aqua, as well as skeuomorphism, which was having computer interfaces look like real life analogs. He passed away, which was really sad because I miss having a rich guy who had convictions. And so when he had a bad idea, all that we got was a very well designed speaker that didn't sell so well, instead of, the twits that we have today who, when they have a bad idea, democracy dies. Anyway, after Steve passed, his friend and Apple's chief designer, Johnny Ive, took over interface designs. And Apple then moved into the iOS 7 design. They didn't even give it a name. Some people just called it like the flat look. I imagine there was a lot of people just referred to it as the iOS 7 look, but everything was flat. They did do some stuff with they loved blurring things, and that was supposed to give it a sense of place. But it also got rid of all of the buttons in the iPhone interface, which meant that anyone trying to help someone who wasn't familiar with an iPhone use an iPhone, you'd end up saying things like, okay, now press the back button. And then they'd be like, there is no back button. And then you'd be like, it's the arrow in the top left that points to the left. It's the universal symbol for going backward. And then they'd tell you it doesn't look like a button to me. And then I would sigh. When iOS 7 came out, the iPhone and the iPad looked like they belonged together really quickly, but macOS took a while to eventually get in sync with iOS in terms of like something looked the same on the Mac as it does on the iPhone. And, the only difference was like the interface is designed for a mouse and keyboard versus a touchscreen. But that really only completed in the fall of 2020 with the release of macOS Big Sur. So if we've only had things consistent for about 5 years now, why is Apple doing a whole new interface for the whole product line? Well, part of that is because the interface actually hasn't been consistent for all of the products because Apple released the Vision Pro. And while I wouldn't say that the Vision Pro interface looks that dissimilar from the iPhone and iPad and Mac, there definitely is some distinct stuff because when they were designing the Vision Pro, the idea was you wear it on your face and it's projecting the real world mixed in with a computer. And so the computer interface stuff needed to blend into your surrounding, feel like it belonged there. So they had to do stuff where they learned to make an interface that interacted with the light around you. And it looks really cool. And you don't really necessarily even think about it that much when you're using the product, but because they did all, and this is this is a thing that's pretty consistent with Apple. They learn a bunch of stuff when they make a new product, and then once that releases, those new things, even if they're not necessarily needed in all their other products, you get a lot of cross-pollination. And so what you're now seeing is all of the other devices are going to have these user interface elements that look kind of like they could belong in the real world, where depending on how you hold your phone, the light will kind of go into the button. Not necessarily like I don't think they're going to be tracking external light sources, at least right now, but there'll be like a sense of like light is probably coming from up. And so if you tilt your phone in a certain way, the light that's hitting the buttons and the sides and kind of highlighting it, that's going to shift and it's going to feel uh, like it'll make sense to your eye. That's how I'll say it. And you're not even going to really think about it, but it will be something that's very difficult for any of their competitors to mimic, which will mean using using the current OS and then going to anything else is going to make anything else feel a little flatter, a little cheaper, a little. So it's kind of cool. It's also something that they can do because they've been building very powerful, relative to the need, graphics processors into all of their devices for a while, particularly the Macs since 2020 when the Apple Silicon chips started rolling out. Those all had graphics processors that were far more powerful than the previous Intel integrated ones that they've been using. And they were also very power efficient because they were based off of the graphics processing units that were integrated into iPhones and iPads, which also were able to do really impressive stuff for very little power cost. So this is also going to be an interface that would be, again, not only is it difficult from a technical standpoint for a competitor to rip off, it's also going to be difficult for a competitor to rip off while still maintaining good battery life. So overall, it's going to be really fun for me getting to play with the new OS in the fall when it launches, and I may or may not actually try the public beta on one of my devices, maybe. But it's definitely they're moving in the direction of being able to make using an iPhone feel more unique than it has in a while compared to competitors. And that's probably a good chance. That's probably a good decision.